June 24th, 1945, Moscow, Red Square. The sun is already blazing over the cobblestones when the victory parade begins. Hundreds of thousands of people line the streets. The sound of drums fills the air like a heartbeat. And there, at the head of one of the most celebrated military columns in history, rides a Marshal of the Soviet Union. His chest glitters with orders and medals. His posture is rigid, carved from stone. His face reveals nothing, not pride, not emotion, not relief. His name is Leonid Alexandrovich Govorov. And here's where the story breaks, because 25 years before this parade, this same man, this decorated Soviet marshal, was riding in the opposite direction. He was wearing a different uniform. He was serving a different army. He was fighting against the very system that just placed him on that horse. He fought for the whites. He served under Admiral Kolchak. How does a man cross that line and not just survive, but end up commanding the defense of Leningrad? How does someone with the most dangerous biography in Stalin's Soviet Union rise to become one of the most trusted officers in the entire Red Army? This is not a story about luck. This is a story about cold calculation, iron discipline, and a kind of survival that borders on genius. Let us go back to the beginning. The village of Butyrki, Vyatka Governorat. The year's 1897. A boy is born into a peasant family. His father is a self-educated man with extraordinary, almost calligraphic handwriting. A rare thing for someone of his background. He's not wealthy. He's not connected. He has no friends in powerful places. But he has one thing that he passes on to his son, the belief that precision matters, that details matter, that the difference between a careless man and a careful one is everything. The boy's name is Leonid, and from the beginning he's different. He excels in school with the kind of quiet intensity that unnerves his classmates. He works part-time at a meteorological station, measuring, recording, analyzing. While other boys dream of adventure, young Leonid dreams of blueprints. He wants to build ships. He wants to design the great steel vessels that cross oceans, carrying cargo and civilizations. He enrolls at the Petrograd Polytechnic Institute, Faculty of Shipbuilding. He's exactly where he wants to be. Then December 1916 arrives, and the Russian Empire, grinding itself to pieces in the First World War, revokes the military deferments of university students. Overnight, the boy who wanted to build ships is handed a rifle instead. He's sent to the Konstantinovsky Artillery School, and something unexpected happens. He's good at this, very good. Not just competent, brilliant. The mathematics of artillery, the geometry of trajectories, the precise calculation of angle and powder charge and wind, it all speaks to the same part of his mind that loved meteorological measurements and engineering blueprints. He graduates as a second lieutenant, and history swallows him whole. What follows is not a story of ideology. It is a story of geography. September 1918. The town of Yelabuga falls to the White Army, to the forces of the Committee of Members of the Constituent Assembly, the so-called Komuch. The Govorov brothers, Leonid and Nikolai, find themselves on the wrong side of a shifting line. The whites are here. The reds are not. And in the chaos of civil war, young officers don't always choose their side. Sometimes their side is simply whoever shows up at their door first. They enlist in the Komuch forces. Later they serve under Kolchak. Leonid reaches the rank of sub-lieutenant. He fires artillery for the white cause on the Eastern Front. He is, by any Soviet definition that will follow, a class enemy, a traitor. A man whose file, if examined in the wrong room at the wrong moment, could become a death sentence. But Leonid Govorov is watching. He's calculating. He always is. By late 1919, the White Army is collapsing. Kolchak's forces are retreating across Siberia in frozen disarray. And here, at the precise moment when most men would simply surrender and wait, Govorov makes his first great calculated move. He does not wait to be captured. He does not surrender. He deserts, deliberately. He crosses over to the Red Army on his own initiative, under his own will, with no guarantee that they will not shoot him on the spot. It is an extraordinary gamble, and it pays off. He's accepted. And then, this is the part that transforms everything. He does not ask for forgiveness. He does not beg for mercy. He fights. He throws himself into the battles against General Wrangel in southern Russia with ferocious, almost reckless competence. The Red commanders notice. The results are undeniable. He earns the Order of the Red Banner, the highest military honor of the young Soviet state. His past is not erased, but it is, for now, buried under performance. There is one more thread running through these years that must be named, because no story of Leonid Govorov is complete without her. Her name is Lydia Izdebskaya. He meets her in the gallery of the Odessa Opera House, the cheapest seats, high up under the ceiling, where young officers on thin wages could still afford Tchaikovsky. She's sharp, warm, perceptive, in a way that he, reserved, almost pathologically private, is not. She becomes, in the words of those who knew them, his only confessor, the one person to whom he does not need to perform, calm. In a life of extreme public control, she's his private relief. In a system that demands ideological purity, she is his human anchor. They marry. They build a life. And that life, fragile as all lives are in the Soviet Union of the 1920s, will be tested in ways neither of them can yet imagine, because the system that Govorov has just joined does not forget. It keeps records. It builds files. Somewhere in a Moscow office, a clerk is writing down the words "served under Kolchak" and underlining them. The clock's ticking, and Leonid Govorov knows it. He responds the only way he knows how. He opens his books. He sharpens his pencil. He begins to calculate. The 1920s in the Soviet Union are a decade of masks. Everyone is performing loyalty. Everyone is rewriting their biography, trimming the dangerous edges, adjusting the story to fit the new reality. Former Tsarist officers are everywhere in the Red Army. There are simply not enough trained commanders to replace them. For now, the system needs them. For now, the past can be managed. Leonid Govorov manages his past the way a surgeon manages a wound. Carefully, precisely, without panic. He does not drink. He does not complain. He does not seek the company of those who whisper in kitchens about the old days. He shows up to work before anyone else and leaves after everyone else has gone home. His colleagues find him cold, distant, almost mechanical. They do not understand that what looks like coldness is actually armor. In a system where a careless word in the wrong ear can destroy a family, silence is not rudeness. Silence is survival. He teaches. He studies. He writes methodological papers on artillery tactics, so precise and so technically rigorous that his superiors cannot ignore them even when they would prefer to. His mind is a machine that runs on problems, and he feeds it constantly. But the system is watching, and the system has a long memory. The barrier arrives in the form of a small piece of paper, or rather, the absence of one. To advance in the Red Army, to attend the prestigious Frunze Military Academy, to reach the higher commands, an officer needs a party card. The Communist Party membership card is not merely a political symbol, it is a key. Without it, certain doors are permanently closed, certain promotions are impossible, certain conversations never happen. Govorov applies for party membership. He's rejected. The reason, delivered in the language of Soviet bureaucratic cruelty, states that he has not reached the required level of political consciousness. What it means, translated into plain language, is something else entirely. Your file, says Kolchak. We have not forgotten. Another man might crack here. Another man might drink himself numb or surrender to bitterness or quietly resign himself to a mid-tier career in a minor garrison. Govorov does none of these things. He receives the rejection the way he receives all information, as a data point, a variable, a constraint to be engineered around. He cannot change his past, so he makes his present so undeniably valuable that the past becomes a liability no one wants to pay. He enrolls in the Frunze Academy by correspondence. The long way, the slow way. The way that requires twice the discipline and half the recognition. He studies at night, by lamplight, after the rest of the household has gone to sleep. He finishes. And in 1936, already nearly 40 years old, an age when many officers have reached their ceiling. He's admitted to the prestigious Academy of the General Staff, the highest institution of military education in the Soviet Union, the school that produces chiefs, not soldiers. The rejection did not stop him. It aimed him. Around him during these years, the world is catching fire. The Great Terror of 1937 and 38 does not spare the military. It devours it. Marshal Tukhachevsky, the most celebrated military mind in the Soviet Union, is arrested, tried, and shot. Then his associates, then their associates, then anyone who once attended a meeting where someone who knew Tukhachevsky was present. The Red Army loses 3 of its 5 marshals, 13 of its 15 army commanders, 50 of its 57 corps commanders. In a single year, the Soviet military is decapitated. Officers with clean proletarian biographies vanish overnight. Officers with impeccable party records disappear into black cars and do not come back. And somehow, by a miracle that historians still debate, Leonid Govorov, the man with Kolchak in his file, survives, not because he's protected, not because he has powerful friends, but because he has made himself indispensable through pure technical expertise, and because the paranoid logic of the purges, which follows no rational path, simply did not arrive at his door. He survives, and he understands with absolute clarity that the debt is still on the books. The nickname comes from these years, and it sticks for the rest of his life. Aptekar, the pharmacist. It begins as a joke among his subordinates. Govorov always carries a stopwatch. He always carries a magnifying glass. When he inspects artillery positions, he measures angles with the precision of a surveyor. When he calculates firing solutions, he checks and rechecks every variable. Barrel temperature, ammunition batch, soil composition, humidity. His orders are so specific, so carefully measured, that one officer once muttered, "With him, everything is exact like in a pharmacy." Govorov hears this. He does not smile. He does not object, because he understands that the nickname is not mockery, it is description. And description is documentation. And in a system that destroys the imprecise and rewards the useful, being known as the man whose calculations are always right is the most valuable reputation possible. The pharmacist does not deal in approximations. The pharmacist does not say probably or approximately or more or less. The pharmacist gives you the correct dose every time. War for Govorov is not chaos. War is a very complex equation, and equations have solutions. The solution comes first in Finland, the Winter War of 1939 to 1940. The Soviet Union attacks Finland and promptly humiliates itself. The Red Army, still reeling from the purges that killed most of its experienced commanders, throws men against the Mannerheim Line, the legendary Finnish defensive fortifications, and watches them fail again and again in the frozen forests south of Leningrad. Govorov is pulled out of the General Staff Academy before he can finish his final year. There's no time for diplomas. The Army needs artillery experts at the front immediately. He's assigned as Chief of Artillery for the 7th Army on the Karelian Isthmus. He arrives and immediately sees what everyone else is missing. The problem with the Mannerheim Line is not that the Finnish bunkers are impenetrable. The problem is that Soviet artillery is trying to destroy them from a safe, conventional distance. The shells are landing at angles that the concrete absorbs and deflects. The physics are wrong. The math is wrong. Govorov's solution is so obvious, once he states it, that his colleagues cannot believe no one thought of it before. Move the heavy guns forward, right up to the front line. Take away the distance, take away the angle. Fire directly at the firing slits and observation ports at point-blank range, not as artillery support, as a scalpel. It works. The bunkers that have been absorbing weeks of bombardment begin to crack and crumble within days. The Mannerheim Line breaks. The war ends with a Soviet victory at terrible cost, but it ends. Govorov receives his second order of the Red Banner, and someone in Moscow, a man with a pipe and a mustache who reviews military reports with the same obsessive attention that Govorov applies to firing solutions, begins to pay attention to a name. June 22, 1941, 4:15 in the morning. Germany attacks the Soviet Union across a front of nearly 3,000 kilometers. The largest military operation in human history begins in darkness and advances in flames. Within days, entire Soviet armies cease to exist. Within weeks, German tank columns are visible from Moscow's outer suburbs. Govorov is given command of the artillery of the entire western strategic direction. He's in the eye of the storm, the Moscow front, the Mozhaisk line, the last barrier before the capital. His Fifth Army is assigned to hold the Mozhaisk direction against Army Group Center's armored spearheads. He fights the way he always fights, not emotionally, not heroically, mathematically. He studies the German advance patterns and identifies which roads their armor prefers. He orders forests felled across those roads, not as obstacles but as channels, forcing the German columns into pre-calculated killing zones. He positions his artillery at the exact angles required to maximize damage to armored vehicles, not at the positions the manual recommends, but at the positions the geometry demands. He hauls tanks out of ditches and uses them as stationary artillery platforms. He stockpiles ammunition at positions that seem wrong to every other officer, but that, when the Germans arrive, turn out to be exactly right. And while Leonid holds the line at Mozhaisk, Lydia holds their apartment building in Moscow. She stands on the roof at night with a bucket of sand and tongs, pulling incendiary bombs off the roof tiles before they catch. She does not evacuate. She does not ask permission. She simply decides that the Govorov family does not retreat. They are, in every sense of the word, fighting together. And in the Kremlin, the man with the pipe has made his decision. Moscow will be held. But there is another city that is dying, a city that has been encircled for months. A city of millions where people are already beginning to starve, where the German artillery falls every day like clockwork, where the previous commander failed and the one before him failed, and no one in the Soviet command structure knows what to do. The city is Leningrad, and Govorov, the white officer who became a red marshal, the pharmacist who turned war into chemistry, the man whose biography should have destroyed him 10 times over, is about to be sent there. Not because Stalin trusts him completely, but because Stalin trusts no one else more. April 1942. The road into Leningrad is a road into another world. The city has been surrounded since September of the previous year. For 7 months, nearly 3 million people have been cut off from the rest of the country by a ring of German and Finnish forces that stretches across forests, rivers, and frozen swamps. The only connection to the mainland is a narrow corridor across the ice of Lake Ladoga, a route that the Leningraders call the Road of Life, and that the Germans call a target. Inside the ring, the city's dying by arithmetic. The bread ration for a factory worker in the worst months was 250 grams per day. For everyone else, office workers, children, the elderly, 125 grams, a piece of bread the size of a fist, per day. People were collapsing in the streets in queues at their work benches. Bodies were being moved on sleds because there were no longer enough people with strength to carry them. Into this dying city, Stalin personally sends Leonid Govorov. The order is simple in its language and impossible in its demands. Govorov is to command the Leningrad group of forces. He is to prevent the Germans from storming the city. He is to suppress the German artillery that is shelling residential neighborhoods every single day. And he is to prepare, at some point somehow, when the conditions are right, to break the blockade from the inside. Govorov arrives and spends his first 48 hours not in the command post, but at the front line. He walks the trenches personally. He looks at everything. He measures everything. He says almost nothing. What he sees fills him with cold fury. The trenches are not trenches. They are scratches, shallow cuts in the earth barely deep enough to crouch in, offering almost no protection from shrapnel. And between the positions scattered across the frozen ground in attitudes of terrible stillness are the unburied dead, hundreds of them, left where they fell week after week because no one had issued orders to bury them. And in the chaos of the blockade, no one had taken the initiative. Govorov issues his first order within hours of his inspection. Every dead soldier is to be buried immediately. Every trench is to be dug to full regulation depth. He does not frame this as a question of military morale, though it is that too. He frames it as mathematics. A soldier in a proper trench is exposed to less than a tenth of the shrapnel that a soldier in a shallow one. Proper burial of the dead prevents the spread of disease. Every soldier who dies of infection or a preventable wound is a resource destroyed. His officers are stunned. They expected strategic brilliance. They got a burial order. But within 3 weeks, sniper and shrapnel casualties drop measurably. The soldiers notice. The pharmacist has measured the dose correctly. His second innovation is the counter-battery system. The German artillery has been shelling Leningrad on a schedule. Every day at predictable intervals, shells fall on the Nevsky Prospect, on the hospital buildings, on the tram lines. The previous commanders treated this as a fact of nature, something to endure, like winter. Govorov treats it as a problem with a solution. He moves Soviet artillery forward, much further forward than any doctrine recommends. He deploys sound ranging stations across the front, acoustic instruments that can triangulate the position of a German gun from the sound of its firing. The moment a German battery fires, the sound ranging team calculates its position. Govorov's artillery fires back within minutes. The German gunners, who have been firing with complete impunity for 7 months, suddenly find that firing a gun at Leningrad has consequences. The shelling does not stop, but its intensity drops, measurably, statistically. The pharmacist has adjusted the formula. Then the war becomes personal. Lydia Govorova, his wife, is in Moscow. She's pregnant. She has been ordered, as all civilian family members of front commanders were ordered, to stay there, safe, at a distance from the fighting. Govorov himself signed the directive that required this. He understands the logic. Lydia ignores it. She travels to Lake Ladoga. She crosses the road alive, the ice road under German aircraft, in a military truck that has no heating and no certainty of arriving. And she reaches Leningrad. When Govorov is informed that his wife has arrived in the city in defiance of explicit orders, he stands in silence for a long moment. Then he arranges her accommodation. There is a detail that passes down through the Govorov family like a religious artifact. A German artillery shell, the kind that his counter-battery teams are now hunting, passes through the window of their Leningrad apartment one night. It does not detonate. It tumbles across the room and comes to rest against the opposite wall, leaving a long scar in the plaster. It passes within centimeters of where Lydia is standing. The shell fragment is kept, never discarded. The family's private monument to the night the war reached all the way into the living room and missed. Govorov says nothing about this incident, not publicly, not in dispatches, not in memoirs. He catalogs it the way he catalogs everything and files it in the part of himself that does not appear in official records. By the autumn of 1942, Stalin does something remarkable. He accepts Govorov, the former Kolchak officer, the man who was rejected by the party for insufficient consciousness, into the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. There is no fanfare. There is no ceremony worth recording, but the meaning is enormous. Stalin, who trusted no one, who signed lists of names for the purges the way other men sign receipts, has decided that Govorov's usefulness outweighs his biography. The file marked Kolchak is not destroyed. It is simply moved to a different drawer. Govorov receives the news the way he receives everything. He nods. He returns to his maps, because there is work to do, the most important work of his life. Breaking the Leningrad blockade requires crossing the Neva River in January, in full view of German fortifications on the eastern bank, with soldiers who have been starving for over a year. The operation is called Iskra, spark. The first rehearsal is a catastrophe. Govorov watches as his soldiers attempt to cross a training ground set up to simulate the Neva crossing. Men fall after 20 meters, not from fire, from exhaustion. Their legs give out. Their lungs fail. 7 months of starvation rations have turned combat infantry into walking skeletons. The muscles simply do not work. Another commander might have reported the rehearsal as adequate and hoped for the best. Govorov cancels the operation and rebuilds the army from the foundations. He constructs training complexes, full-scale replicas of the German fortifications on the eastern bank of the Neva, built from intelligence photographs and captured maps. Every defensive position, every bunker, every trench system reproduced in exact dimensions on Soviet soil. His soldiers train on these replicas for weeks. They learn the specific geography of the ground they will cross. They learn it in daylight and in darkness. They learn it in snow and in fog, and he feeds them. Whatever the supply lines can bring across the ice, Govorov directs toward his assault divisions, not distributed evenly, not spread thin across the entire front, concentrated deliberately in the units that will lead the crossing. He understands that a battle is not won by the average condition of an army. It is won by the condition of the men at the point of attack. He introduces the PPS submachine gun, Sudaev's new weapon, lighter than anything the infantry had carried before. Designed specifically for the close-quarters combat of urban and trench fighting, he floods the assault battalions with them. He delivers a speech before the operation that his officers will quote for the rest of their lives. He calls what they are about to do the Nevsky Izmail, a reference to the legendary storming of the Ottoman fortress of Izmail by Suvorov in 1790, the greatest assault operation in Russian military history. He does not say it with theatrical emotion. He says it the way he says everything, precisely, quietly, as a statement of fact. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. The math is correct. January 12, 1943, 09:45 in the morning. The artillery preparation begins on both banks simultaneously, from Govorov's Leningrad front on the west and from Meretskov's Volkhov front on the east, converging on the narrow corridor of German-held territory between them. Over 2,000 guns open fire at once. The sound is heard in Finland. The ground shakes continuously for over 2 hours. Then the order is given to advance. There is a moment of chaos that no one who plans a battle can fully control. The military orchestra assigned to signal the infantry advance plays the signal early, before the artillery has shifted its fire. For a few terrible seconds, soldiers begin moving toward a barrage that has not yet lifted. Officers scream into field telephones. The timing calculations that Govorov has checked and rechecked over 6 weeks are suddenly irrelevant. The catastrophe does not happen, not because of planning, because of the margins Govorov built into the plan, the extra seconds of delay, the additional calibration of trajectories, the obsessive over-preparation that his officers found excessive, all of it, every seemingly redundant calculation, creates just enough space between the advancing men and the falling shells. The pharmacist had measured for error. 7 days of brutal fighting follow. On January 18, 1943, the soldiers of the Leningrad front and the Volkhov front meet each other in the snow east of the city. The corridor is 11 kilometers wide, thin as a thread, but it is open. The blockade is broken. When the news reaches the city, people weep in the streets. They weep in the hospitals, in the factories, in the basements where families have been sleeping for 17 months to escape the shelling. They weep the way people weep when they have been holding their breath for so long that exhaling feels like dying. Govorov does not weep. He's already looking at the next map. Because the corridor is not freedom, it is a beginning. The blockade is weakened, not lifted. German forces still surround the city on 3 sides. The shelling continues. The dying continues. There is still work to do. It takes exactly 1 more year. January 27, 1944. Operation Neva 2. Govorov coordinates a simultaneous assault along the entire southern front around Leningrad, driving the German forces back to a distance from which their artillery can no longer reach the city. 872 days after the blockade began, it ends. That night, Leningrad fires a salute. Not the standard 12-gun salute that Moscow fires for military victories. Stalin authorizes a special 24-gun salute, fired from Leningrad itself with Leningrad's own guns. The only time in the entire war that a city is permitted to celebrate its own liberation with its own artillery. The pharmacist's guns fire the salute. Leonid Govorov ends the war as one of only 5 officers to hold the rank of Marshal of the Soviet Union. The man with Kolchak in his file. The man who was told he lacked sufficient political consciousness. The man who was rejected by his own army's ideology and responded by becoming indispensable to it. He rides in the victory parade on June 24, 1945. His face reveals nothing, not pride, not vindication, not the complicated grief of a man who has spent 30 years being the wrong person in the right uniform, but somewhere inside that still, measured, controlled exterior, somewhere in the man who keeps a stopwatch and a magnifying glass, who builds trench replicas and trains soldiers in darkness, who keeps a German shell fragment as a family relic and says nothing about it publicly, somewhere in there, perhaps, is a single unspoken thought. The equation was correct. The answer was always there. It just required enough patience, enough precision, and enough refusal to be broken by a world that never stopped trying.